Hello everybody. I'd like to welcome y'all to the Excel Business Intelligence virtual chapter meeting. Today we have Dustin Ryan presenting for us. Is Dustin there?
Yep, I'm here, Thomas. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Sorry, I had mine on mute. This session is being recorded, so if you missed part of it or you want someone else to see it later on, you can go to our YouTube channel and view it later. First, we'd like to talk about the past summit, which is about a month away. It is one of the largest gathering of SQL Server and BI professionals. I've been there the last 7 out of 8 years, and it's a wonderful conference to learn a lot about SQL Server, network with a bunch of people that do the same thing that you do, and get to visit different sponsors that might lead to other contacts. Also, if you have not registered yet, on the bottom, VC15CWV7 is the discount code for this virtual chapter, and you will save $150 on the virtual chapter plus help support this particular virtual chapter. There are many virtual chapters. I advise go to sequelpass.org/VC to visit them all. I'm sure there's one that can appeal to you or possibly more than one. The next coming weeks are different sessions from different virtual chapters. Visit the site under the events area to see more detail about all of these sessions. Also, if you've never been to a SQL Saturday, here are some that are coming up in the next month, North America as well as internationally. This is a great way to go to a free event. It's usually sponsored by some companies and usually run by volunteers in the SQL Server community. And if not, join a local chapter. There's local chapters of SQL Server user groups all over the place. There's a bunch of things that you benefit from them, especially the networking and the opportunities even to present and learn more about SQL Server. Also, next week on September 17th, there is a preview to the past summit. So once an hour, every hour for 24 hours, there will be free SQL Server and BI training, just like what you're going to see today. It's at 24hoursofpast.com. Go there to register. And I believe there's a limit on the amount of people that can view some of these sessions. So get there early and get your spot. Also, if you want to become part of this community, which is what I've done for probably the past 5 or 6 years, it's a wonderful way to show your passion for SQL Server as well as help others learn more about SQL Server. There's a volunteer page once you create a past profile that you can show what you want to volunteer for. We also have a passion award every year. If you know somebody that's done a lot of work in the past community, please nominate them for this award. And also, there's a free membership at sequelpass.org, and you can communicate via LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Pass. Now I'm going to turn everything over to Dustin, and he's going to present for us on an introduction to Power Pivot.
All right, thank you, Thomas. And before we get started, I'd just like to say a personal thank you to Thomas for allowing me to come do this, and a personal thank you to the past Excel BI virtual chapter for you guys having me on and letting me do this presentation. And I enjoy teaching and meeting new people and speaking, and so it's a good opportunity to do all of those things. So thank you, guys. Can you see my screen okay, Thomas? You should be seeing Power Pivot, or my Power Pivot slide deck, rather.
Yes, we can.
All right, okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that everything looked good there. Okay, and as we go through this material here, please feel free to ask questions if things pop up and you're not sure about something I just showed you, or you have a question about something we're discussing. Feel free to type that into the chat window, and then during the session, we'll try to answer those questions. And as we get to the end of the session, we'll try and get to as many of the questions as we can there. So, in case you were wondering, this is our introduction to Power Pivot. Call it Power Pivot 101. My name is Dustin Ryan. I'm a BI consultant with Pragmatic Works. I'm also a trainer at Pragmatic Works. I teach the Power BI class at Pragmatic. I teach the Introduction to MDX, and I also teach the SSAS classes. I'm an author, blogger, and speaker. There's a couple of the books I've worked on, and I'm also a husband and father of 3 of the most beautiful kids in the world you've ever seen. I may be partial. And so what I'd like for us to do during this time together is just have a brief discussion about what Power Pivot is, and how you can use Power Pivot. And then after we kind of discuss some of those points, we'll jump into actually walking through designing a Power Pivot model. Okay, so if you're not familiar with what Power Pivot is an incredibly flexible and dynamic tool that it really has three parts to it. There's the data extraction part of the tool, which allows us to connect to many disparate, disconnected data sources and query those data sources and import the data into our Power Pivot model. So if you have data in Access, everybody's favorite database technology, if you've got data in SQL Server, maybe you've got some stuff in Oracle, maybe you've got these spreadsheets over here, maybe you've even got some flat files. You want to bring all of that into one place and create a model based on all of those different disconnected data sources. Power Pivot is the tool to do that. So you have the ability to extract data out of these many different data sources. Once we've extracted the data out of the data sources, we can then create a data model. And the data model is where we're going to specify the relationships between the objects. You can think of those as the joins between the tables using columns in each table. And we're also going to specify calculated measures, any kind of calculated columns, all kinds of things like that we can build into the Power Pivot. And that's going to be part of the data model. So you're extracting the data, you're importing it into a data model, you're massaging it a little bit, creating calculations, creating relationships that previously didn't exist between those items. So if you have, maybe some data in an Excel spreadsheet that you want to wire up with your data warehouse, you can do that in the data model by creating specific relationships there. Once we've extracted the data, once we've created the data model, then we move on to the piece where we're going to actually be presenting the data in a type of visualization. And we're going to do that through Excel. So Excel, you're probably very familiar with. You have the ability to create pivot tables and pivot charts, many different kinds of pivot tables. So we can have line charts and bar charts and column charts, and we can use pivot tables and display them in drillable reports, and we can create slicers and as interactive filters. And so we have lots of different ways that we can visualize the data there. We also have the ability to create Power View reports. So if you're running Excel 2013, you have the ability to create Power View reports and add Power View sheets into your Excel workbook, which is very cool. You can create some very interactive, very interesting reports using Power View. So that's what Power Pivot is. Now you may be asking yourself, why should I use Power Pivot? Well, there's a lot of really good reasons that you should use Power Pivot. The first one is the performance, right? Performance with Power Pivot models is going to be really great because it uses an in-memory database storage technology called Xvelocity, the Xvelocity engine. And we're going to take our data model once we finish extracting the data and developing the data model and creating our calculations and all those different things that we may do in our data model. It loads that model up into memory. And that once that model is loaded into the memory on our local machine, we're able to query it with really great performance. Another great reason why you might decide to use Power Pivot is the short development cycle. So this development of the model takes place all within our laptop. So we don't have to get IT involved. There's no asking any IT staff to come help us to create this. If we can have access to the data sources, we can create our own models and do all of our designing on our own. So there's no IT involvement necessary. Now, when you may need a little bit of IT involvement is in the case of where maybe you need access to a specific data source at your organization that you don't have access to or can't get to. You may need to get IT involved a little bit there just to get access to those data sources. But if you have access to the data sources currently, there's going to be no IT involvement necessary. Because there's no IT involvement, the development cycles are very quick and easy. So if we can connect to the data sources, it's just a matter of us taking the time to open up Power Pivot, connect to the data sources, import the data that we want, and then creating the model there. So development is going to be very quick and easy. It's also it's a very end-user capable tool. So this all takes place within the Excel environment, and even designing the Power Pivot model is going to feel very Excel-like. So it's a familiar tool set. And chances are, if you're in this class or in this session, you already have at least some experience with Excel, so you're going to feel very comfortable in the Power Pivot modeling environment. So it's going to be familiar tools within the same familiar tools that you're already used to with some enhanced capabilities, and we'll see that as we go through designing the data model. Okay, so not a lot of slides there. I want to jump right into building our Power Pivot model. And there's a lot to go over with Power Pivot, so I'm going to try to move as quickly as possible through designing our Power Pivot model together. We won't have a chance to get to everything that you can do with Power Pivot, but rather my goal with this presentation is to provide you with the basics to get you started with designing a Power Pivot model. So you can walk away from this session, take it to your organization, and get ready to get started designing a Power Pivot model. Okay. Let me open up Excel. Okay, so I've got my Excel workbook opened already here. Now, if you're doing this for the first time, or if you're following along while watching the recording, the first thing that you're going to want to do is actually enable Power Pivot. So if you are running Excel 2010, you're actually going to need to download the Power Pivot add-in, which you can get from Microsoft. So you can just Google that and pop that up. Or if you're running Excel 2013 or Excel 2016, which I'm running the Excel 2016 preview here, so hopefully everything will hold up. But if you're running Excel 2013 or 2016, the Power Pivot plugin already comes available in Excel. You just need to turn it on. So the first thing I need to do here is actually enable Power Pivot. So I can go to File, go to Options here, and I want to go to my add-ins. This is where I'm going to do the enabling of Power Pivot. So I'll go to my add-ins, and in Manage I'm going to go to COM add-ins and click Go here. Okay, so you can see that my Power Pivot add-in is already enabled. I've got the little checkbox there, so that is a good thing. And once I've enabled that, I would click OK. So if you're doing this for the first time, that's the very first thing you're going to do is turn Power Pivot on. Excuse me. Let me turn on my presentation tool here while I'm thinking about it. Forgot to do that. Sorry, guys. Okay, so once you've actually enabled Power Pivot, we can then begin developing our Power Pivot model. After you enable it, you'll see the little Power Pivot tab up here at the top. This is where we get to our Power Pivot tools. And I'm going to click the Manage icon here. So this is going to actually open up the Power Pivot window for us, where we're going to specify our data connections, design the model, create the relationships, and then once we've done all that, then we can start building our reports. So I've clicked Manage. Here's our Power Pivot window. And you'll notice here that right now we just have this big blank screen. So we don't have any data to view or preview or any tables to create relationships between. So the first thing that we need to do is actually import our data. Now, I've used a data source that you should have available here to you. This is out here on CodePlex. This is the Power Pivot sample data and resources. You can go to codeplex.com and just type in, do a search for Power Pivot sample data, and you'll find this. And you can download it. And what this includes is a sample Contoso sales access database, some spreadsheets, and then another product categories access database that you can bring into. So if you're playing along with me, you can use these data sources here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to our data source. So you got a couple options up here at the top in the home ribbon. You can select from database. So I've got things like SQL Server, Access, Analysis Services. I can use these other data services here, Azure Marketplace, OData Feeds, or I can click the From Other Sources, and I can see the entire list of data sources that Power Pivot can connect to. So you can see here that we've got a wide selection to choose from. So text files, Excel, even SSRS reports, analysis services. But in this case, we really only care about Access at this point. So I'm going to select From Access. And I'm going to browse to the location of that file. There it is. There's my Contoso Sales Access Database. Sorry guys, my throat's a little dry. Okay, so I'm going to select that and click Open here. And I'm going to click Next here. All right, and the first thing we have to choose here is we can either specify from a list of tables and views which tables and views we want to import into our Power Pivot model. Or if I had a specific query maybe I wanted to use, I could select that here. But in this case, I don't have a query prepared, so I'm just going to select from a list of tables and views and click Next. Okay, see the tables that are a part of this model here. We have a few different ways that we can select data from here. So I can select the fact sales table here, and then I can click this button here to select related data or related tables. And what this does is it looks at the referential integrity inside of the database, those foreign key type relationships, and it says, okay, I've noticed that there's a foreign key relationship between promotion, product, date, and channel with our fact sales table, and so it's automatically selected those for me. If I didn't want to do that, if I wanted to unselect those, I can click the select all button at the top and then get rid of those. But in this case, I know I want the fact sales table. I want dim promotion. I know I want product subcategory and product. I don't really care about entity, but I do want my dim date table and my dim channel table. Now, one of the first things that you'll want to do here is we can give our friendly names here. So maybe fact doesn't mean anything to our users or our team members who are going to be possibly using this Power Pivot model. So I'll get rid of that. I'll give these some friendly names here. And you may or may not do this. If this is just a Power Pivot model that you're designing for your own personal use, you may not really care about the names because you understand what dim and fact mean. But if you're going to be sharing this with team members that may not understand what a dimension is or what a fact table is, then you may want to give these a little more friendly names. One other nice thing that we can do here is we can also click the preview and filter button here. And this will give us a preview of the data that exists in a particular table. Now this opens up the table import wizard, and you'll notice that this looks very Excel-like. So we've got the header row up at the top where we can do things like sort the data, we can apply filters if necessary. But one of the nice things that you should do here, and that is considered a best practice, is uncheck the columns that we don't necessarily need inside of our data model. Everything that we bring into our data model is going to take up system resources, is going to add to the size of the workbook. So we want to keep our model and our workbook as streamlined as possible. One of the ways we can do that is deselect the columns that are not required for our Power Pivot data model. So for instance, I don't particularly need the sales key in this model, so I would definitely want to come in here and uncheck that column. And that will mean that this column will not be included in the data model. Now, for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm not going to do this for every table, but if you were designing this in a real-world scenario for your organization, you would want to definitely take the time to go through here and uncheck the columns that you don't need in the data. I can also filter the data here. So maybe, for instance, I only care about doing analysis on data on sales that occurred in the previous year. Well, I could come here to my date column in this fact table and click the little drop-down arrow here. I can go to my date filters, and I could say, you know what, I only need data that is after or equal to, and then I can specify a date here. So if I wanted to do something like 2009 forward, I can specify that filter here. So this is also something you should do. If you don't need all of the data in your fact table in your Power Pivot model, then go ahead and apply the necessary filter here. Okay, so I've deselected a few columns here. That's pretty much all I want to do here. I want to keep everything else in our model, so I'm going to click OK. You can see here now that there's a little indicator here saying that there's some applied filters here, and if I wish to see those, I can click on that, and it'll take me back into the column there or give me the details there. If I want to change the filters, I can click Preview and Filter again, and it'll bring me back to there. Okay, so in a real-world scenario, I would have gone through here and made all the filtering changes here and selected the necessary columns. And now I'm going to click Finish. And so what's going to happen here is I'm going to click Finish. It's actually going to go out to my database. It's going to read those tables, and it's going to import all of the data that is in those tables into my Power Pivot model. So depending on how much data you have available in your data source, it may take a couple seconds or it may take a few minutes. In this case, there's not a ton of data, but it does take a few seconds. So just bear with me while it finishes importing. Okay, so it wasn't too bad. So we've finished importing our data model, and I'm going to click Close. And you'll notice here, now we have some things that we can actually look at. Now, there's a couple things here that I want to point out with the Power Pivot design interface. You have basically two views that you can use. You have the grid view, which is what we're looking at here. You can see that it kind of looks like Excel. We've got the very Excel table-like structure up here at the top. I can flip through these tabs down here at the bottom and preview the data that is in the model. So I've got my product subcategory table here. There's my promotion table. There's the sales table that includes my fact data. So this is called the grid view, and this is where we can actually get a preview of the data. And this is where we'll do things like filter the data, change the data formatting, create measures, create calculated columns, do things like that. That's all going to happen in the grid view. The other view we have available to us, and I can flip to down here at the bottom right. If you're looking at my screen, you can see down here in the bottom right. I can flip to the diagram view, and then this is it's not letting me click on that for some reason. There we go. This will take us to the diagram view, and this is where we can view the relationships between the tables. Now in this case, you'll notice that I didn't actually have to create these relationships, and that's because Power Pivot was smart enough to detect the foreign key relationships, and it created the relationships for me. If I wanted to create a relationship manually, maybe I had another data source that I had brought in that didn't have a relationship to these tables, and I needed to create the relationship manually, I could do that by, first I'll just, let me delete this relationship here so I can show you that. So I'm going to delete it from the model. And I'm going to find my product key, and I'm just going to drag it and drop it until the arrow points at the product key in the product table. And every time you do that, you'll notice that there's a little bit of a delay there, and that's because it's actually making the changes to the data model for us on the fly. So anytime you make a change, like change the name of a column, add a measure, change a relationship, add a new table, there's going to be a little bit of a delay because it's making the changes to the data model for us. Okay, now in this case, we only have one relationship between each table. But you may have a scenario where maybe you have what's known as a role-playing dimension, where you have an individual table that is related to a fact table multiple times. So for instance, just as an example here, I don't have this in this scenario, but as an example, maybe in our fact sales table you have multiple types of dates. So maybe you have something like an order date, a ship date, something like that. But you only have one date table where that exists in the data source, but you just have multiple relationships that exist between the fact table and the date table. In Power Pivot, you can only have one active relationship between two tables, and it can only exist between one column in each table. So you can't have things like composite keys, and you can't have multiple active relationships between your two tables. If you're not sure if your relationship is active, you can double click on the relationship, and it'll open up this Edit Relationship button. You can see the relationship between the two columns in the tables, and you'll also notice down here at the bottom there's a little active checkbox, and you can see that it's checked, indicating that this relationship is active. If I set this relationship to, let me set this to inactive, and I click OK, you'll notice that the indicator for the line here is now dotted, indicating that this is an inactive relationship. So let me open that back up and change this back to active because we're going to need that. So I'm going to click OK. Okay, not sure why that keeps opening again. There we go. All right, so thankfully here, all of our relationships are already created. Now, even though we've already created our model here, but we haven't done anything like added any, measures or created any calculated columns or done anything fancy here, we're actually ready to start building reports and viewing the data, but we're going to have to make some tweaks to our model, which you'll see once we start designing our reports. Now, if I want to open up this model, if I want to open up a pivot table or a pivot chart with a live connection to this model, all I have to do is go up here to the home ribbon, find the pivot table icon up here, and I can click this, and I can select that I want to create a pivot table based on this model. Now I can just specify if I want to do this in a new worksheet or existing worksheet. I'm just going to put this here on this sheet, and you can see that I've got a pivot table here. Now if I go to my sales, and if I select in my fields list, I go to my sales table and I can kind of find my different measures. So I've got measures in here, sales amount, total cost, discount amount. These are what are called implicit measures. And Power Pivot has detected that these are numeric data type columns, and it's making an assumption there that this is a numeric data type, so you probably want to aggregate that. So these measures, these columns here I can use as measures. So if I take my sales amount column here and I drag it into my values field box here, you'll see here that I get a sum of sales amount, and this is just a total sales amount rolled up for the whole table. So this is across all time, across all products, across all promotions, across all channels, everything. Now if I want to do some analysis here, I can go to my date column here, and I can find my calendar year. And so I can drop calendar years here on the rows. And I can break out my sales now by year. Now, if I want to break this down further by calendar month, so there's my calendar month label. I can drop this right here, and I can break it out by month. You'll notice here I've got a little bit of funkiness going on, and the reason is Power Pivot is by default sorting this attribute alphabetically. So it's putting April up at the top and September at the end. So it's paying no attention to the fact that January is the first month of the year. So we know that we've got some tweaks here to make to the model to correct this little issue here. One other thing that I'll also point out, if I go back to my sales table, is that I have some keys. These are database keys that exist in our Contoso database. So something like promotion key, I can drop into my values text box here, and it will sum those promotion keys. So that's not exactly something we want either. So these key values we're probably going to want to hide from our users, so that way our users don't try to aggregate these key values. Okay, so we know we've got a little bit of work here to straighten this Power Pivot model out. If I want to go back to my Power Pivot modeling window, I can click the Manage button up here at the top again, and it'll take me back there. If you accidentally close this, it's no big deal. You can just click the Manage button, and it'll reopen the modeling window for you again.
Dustin.
Okay. Yes.
There's a couple questions that you might want to answer.
Sure.
The first one is, when importing data from Access or SQL Server, are there any rules that help us estimate how much local memory is required to populate the Excel data model? Are there any tools to assist in this?
So one of the nice things about Power Pivot is that you're going to get really, really excellent compression because of the XVelocity engine and the columnar database storage format. You're going to get really, really excellent compression. And so, it depends on the data and how much compression you'll get. But I've seen compression ratios higher than 10 to 1. So for you to be able to estimate that is just going to depend on the data that you're bringing in. And I'm not aware of any tools off the top of my head that will estimate what kind of compression you'll get in Power Pivot or even in SSAS Tabular, which uses the same technology.
Okay.
But that's a good question.
Okay, then there's two or three more here. How do you check the compatibility level of Excel Power Pivot data models?
The compatibility level with
Yeah, that's all he asked.
what?
Is it possible you create a data model in an old version and then try to open it up in a new version?
You can open an older version of Power Pivot in a newer version of Power Pivot. So maybe if you created a model in Power Pivot V1, you could upgrade that to Power Pivot V2. You also have the ability to take your Power Pivot models and convert them to things like SSAS tabular models or even Power BI models if you're interested in that as well.
So you can't, so the Power Pivot data model itself is embedded in the XLSX file?
Right, so Power Pivot model is part of the Excel workbook.
Okay, so it's probably the Excel version then. This might be what he's asking. So, okay. The next one is, this is good. Is Microsoft on the way to replace SSAS and SSRS with Power Pivot future versions?
I do not think so. So there's some limitations with Power Pivot that you'll discover once you start to get into it that just make it impossible to replace things like SSAS because you're not going to put 10 terabytes of data into a Power Pivot workbook. SSAS can handle that. So SSAS can scale a lot more than Power Pivot can. And Power Pivot has some limitations too, like different types of difficult calculations that you may be able to perform in SSAS. Also things like row level security, right? You're not going to do that in Power Pivot. And SSRS is just a completely different tool because SSRS is that pixel perfect reporting tool where you can specify, any type of formatting you can imagine in SSRS pretty much. In PowerPivot, you're limited to what you can do in Excel if you're using your Excel as your front end. Although you can connect to PowerPivot with SSRS and Performance Point and Power View and things like that. So you do have some reporting options there.
All right, and one more, and we'll continue. It has to do with the role playing you talked about earlier. How do you
Mhm.
deal with role playing? And as you said, this is very common for dates. How can I physically import a source table multiple times?
So if I wanted to, so in that scenario where we're talking about a role-playing dimension where you could have a table play multiple roles, what I would do is I would import another copy of the date table. So I would go to my existing connections. There's my Contoso connection again. I'm going to open this, select from list of tables. I'll pick the date again. I'll import it again. I won't do that now because I don't want to wait on it, but that's what you would do, is you would import another copy of the date table, and you'd have two date tables in there, and then based on that, you could create the relationships there.
All right, we'll let you
But
go on.
man, those are good questions.
Yeah,
Okay,
there's
man,
a
you guys
couple
are on
more, but
fire today.
wait a little
Asking
while.
lots of good questions.
All right.
Yeah, okay, well, yeah, let's wait a little bit, and we'll keep moving. Okay. All right, so we've got our model here, but we know we've got to make some enhancements, some improvements to it to get everything wired up correctly. One of the nice things that we can do here is we can create hierarchies in our tables. And basically a hierarchy is a way to improve the user's ability to kind of navigate through the data in a table here. So if I want to expand this table, you'll notice that there are a lot of columns here in my date table, and it's kind of a cramped workspace here. I can click this little button here to maximize the window, and it'll kind of expand it out, give me a little bit more real estate. And I can create a hierarchy here. And it's very easy to create hierarchies in PowerPivot as opposed to analysis services, if you're familiar with that. I can select the column that I want to create a hierarchy from, and you can right-click on it and select Create Hierarchy. It says another operation is in progress. Not sure what operation that is. Let me try that again. Okay, there we go. Not sure what it thought was going on there that first time. But you can see here that I've got this little hierarchy icon down here at the bottom. And right now it's just giving it the default name Hierarchy 1, but I could rename this by right-clicking, and let's just call it, Calendar Hierarchy. Okay, and I can see that this level here is based on the calendar year attribute in our date dimension table. I'm going to rename this too. We'll just call this year. Okay, and I'm going to add a few more columns here to it. I want to have my users be able to drill down from year into my calendar month. So I'm just going to right-click on that. We're going to use our label here. I'm going to right-click on that and select Add to Hierarchy, and I can select the calendar hierarchy, and it will automatically add that to our hierarchy. You can see that we've got that down there. And I'm also going to add the date. So there's the full date label there. I'm going to right-click and add to hierarchy, select calendar hierarchy. All right, now we've got our hierarchy down here. If for some reason something got out of order, I can drag and drop this and move these levels around if I need to. But in this case, everything happens to be in the right order, so that looks good. And I'm just going to rename this here. All right, so we've got our hierarchy here. Now, if I want to go back to the regular view, I can just click that little button again, and it'll restore it. Now I can go back to Excel, and let me clear some of this space out in here. And all those changes happen in real time to our model. So if I drill down into my date table again, you'll see now that I have my calendar hierarchy available for us to begin working with. So I can just click the little checkbox next to it, and you'll see that now I have this interactive multi-level hierarchy that our users can use to navigate through the data. So I can drill down into 2007, I can see the months, then I can select the month, and I can drill down into those days. So I've got this nice little interactive hierarchy that gives our users the ability to navigate through the data very easily and in a very intuitive way. Of course, we've still got the issue here with the months, so we can straighten this out here. Let's go back to our PowerPivot workbook. And to straighten out the issue with the sorting of the months, I'm going to go back to my grid view here and view the data. And we're going to go to the date table here. And what we need to do is we need to find our calendar month label column. There it is. And we want to sort by a different column. We want to tell our PowerPivot model that we want to sort our month names by something else. Now, in this case, I've got a calendar month column here that includes the year number concatenated with the month number. So this looks like something we can use. If I want to sort my calendar month label by another column, I'm going to select this column like I have here. Go to the sort by column up here at the top right and select this, and I'm going to select sort by column. And now I can specify that I want to sort my calendar month label by another column. So let me just find the one that I want to use. I guess I passed it. There it is, calendar month. And I'm going to get an error here, and I just want to kind of show this to you. It's saying that we cannot sort our calendar month label by calendar month because at least one value in the calendar month label has multiple distinct values in calendar month. And so what that means is that our calendar month label is July, but we have more than one instance of July. We have July 2005, we have July 2006, July 2007, and so it's saying that there are multiple distinctive calendar months for our calendar month labels. So we need to make a little tweak here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a calculated column that is only the month number from this column here. And so to do that, all I have to do is I can go to my design tab up here at the top, and where is it at? Maybe it was over here. I guess I'm used to Power BI. I've been working with Power BI so much that I forgot where it was at. But to insert a new column, you can just right-click on the column as well and select Insert Column. Okay, and we see that we've got a new blank column here. And this is where we're going to get our first instance of using DAX, which is the Data Analysis Expression Language. The DAX expression language is very similar to Excel, so if you're familiar with writing Excel formulas, you'll probably be able to pick up DAX pretty easily. And so DAX formulas are going to look very similar to Excel. We start with the equal sign, and I'm going to use the right function here to get me the right two characters from calendar month. So I just selected the column there, put a comma 2 to specify that I want to get the right two characters. Okay, and we can see that this is working. So we've got our right two characters now. I'm going to rename this column. We'll call this calendar month number. Okay. And I want to format this as a whole number. There we go. So I'm going to select data type up at the top and select whole number. Now we should be able to sort this by our calendar month number. And it's going to be all the way at the bottom because it's a new column, and click OK. All right, so now we've sorted this, so let's go back to our pivot table and check this out, make sure it looks right. Aha, everything looks good. So January is up at the top, December is at the bottom, everything is right in the world now. Okay, so let's go back to our Power Pivot model. All right, so we've got our Power Pivot model here. We've created a hierarchy here in our date dimension. I've got a product table over here. I've got a product subcategories table, but what I really want to bring into my model is some product category data. And I happen to have this existing in a spreadsheet. So we have our product and product subcategory data in our Access database, but we've got our product category in an Excel spreadsheet. And so I can create an additional data connection here to that Excel spreadsheet and import it into our data model. So we have an example here of using two different types of data sources and bringing them together in Power Pivot. So I'm going to select the From Other Sources option up here. Scroll down, find Excel, and click Next. I'm going to browse, and there is my file, my product categories Excel file. I'm going to click OK. There's the friendly connection name there. We'll just call this Excel product categories. That looks good. My first row is the column headers, so I want to make sure I check that. And I'm going to click Next. And this is the sheet that we want to use here. This is our product category sheet, the source table. I want to make sure you select the right sheet in case you have multiple sheets inside of your workbook. You can do a preview and filter here just like you did in the when we were importing the Access data. Everything looks good here, so I'm not going to make any changes there. And I'll click Finish. And so now our product category Excel spreadsheet is imported into our Power Pivot model. And just give it a second here. It's bringing it into the model. There we go. Looks good. We've got our Excel data here. And I just need to create a relationship here now between subcategory and product categories. Now in my product subcategory table, I've got a product category key. So I'm just going to drag that down here and create the relationship to my product categories table. All right. For some reason, it's thinking that I'm double clicking on it, so that's why it keeps bringing up that error there. All right. Now I want to rename this table because it's instead of having the name sheet 1, so we'll just call this product category. Okay, great. All right. So now I've got my product category data that I brought in from Excel, got our access data here. If I want to create a hierarchy with my product categories and my subcategories and my products all at the same time, I need to have the columns all in one table. So one of the restrictions to creating a hierarchy is all the columns that you want to be included in the hierarchy need to be a part of the same table. So I need to create some calculated columns here in my product table to bring my product category and subcategories over into my product table. So let's go back to our grid view over here. All right, I'm going to go to my product table here. And I'm going to add some new columns here. Now the first column I want to add is going to include my product subcategory name. So I'm going to start a new expression here and click the equal key there. And the first function I'm going to use to bring in a column from a related table is the related function. Now you notice as soon as I start typing, the IntelliSense pops up and gives me a hint about which function it thinks I should write. That's one of the really nice things about DAX and writing DAX expressions is that the IntelliSense is very, very good. And so the expressions will almost write themselves for you. So I'm going to use the related function to return a column from a related table. So in this case, I just need to find my product subcategory name, double click that, and close the parentheses, and click enter. Okay, I can see that I've got my subcategories now. I'm going to do the same thing for my product category. So I'm going to use the related function again. This is from the product category table. There's the product category name. And you can also click the tab button and it will finish typing the expression for you. And I'll close the parentheses and hit enter. All right, so now I've got subcategories and categories in this table. Now let's just rename these to give these some user-friendly names. Subcategory, and we'll rename this one product category. Okay, now that I've got all of that data here in the same table, I can create a hierarchy based on that. So let's go back to our diagram view. The product table, I'm going to maximize this to give us a little more space. So there's my product category column that we just added. I'm going to right click on it and select create hierarchy. We'll call this product hierarchy. And I'm going to add the subcategory, and I'm going to try and move quickly here because we're running out of time. So that's what the recordings are for. If I moved a little too quickly for you, then you can always come back later and watch the recordings as many times as you want. And now I'm going to add the product name to the hierarchy. Okay, so we've got our category, subcategory, and name in a product hierarchy now. Let's minimize this. Go back to our Excel workbook. I'm going to get rid of the calendar hierarchy out of there. I'm going to go to our product table. There's our new product hierarchy, and now our users can drill through the different product categories, the subcategories, and see the individual products. So pretty cool. We've already gained some pretty impressive analysis, analytics capabilities with Power Pivot just by doing about 10 minutes worth of work here. All right, so we've created two hierarchies. We've got our product hierarchy and our calendar hierarchy. I could even use these at the same time if I wanted to. I could put the years on the columns and the products on the product hierarchy on the rows. And you can see how great the performance is, right? It's loaded all of this up into memory. There's really no delay in drilling down. I can look at the day level and at the product level with no delay because the performance is so impressive. Okay, so let's go back to our Power Pivot manager here. And one of the things that we'll want to do is we want to create what are called explicit measures. And explicit measures are measures that are explicitly created by us as the developer. So if I wanted to create a measure maybe for my, let me go to my sales table first. That's what I was looking for. Go to my sales table here. If I wanted to create a measure that showed my total sales amount, where is it at? Am I missing? Oh, there it is, down at the very end. If I was a DAX guru, which I am not, I could come in here and I could select an empty cell down here in the bottom pane, so you can see that data view, or the grid view here, is kind of split up into two areas. You have your data preview up here at the top, and then this is where you will specify any calculated measures you wish to create. I could come down here and just hit the equal key and start typing in my expression if I wanted to. Or if I want to do this with as little coding as possible, I can just select the column up here and then select the auto sum button up here at the top to automatically create a measure that sums up this column. Okay, that looks good. You can control the formatting of this measure by selecting it up here just like you would in Excel. So very similar to Excel. If I want to do the total, if I want to do the same thing for the total cost, I can select the total cost column here, click auto sum, and it will sum that up for me too. So with no coding, I've already created a couple of explicit measures here. Now you may be asking yourself, why do I want to create explicit measures when I can just do the same thing with implicit measures? Well, explicit measures allow you to control the way that a metric is calculated, so you may not want to leave that up to the users. That may be something you want to take control of. Also, you can use explicit measures to help you design other explicit measures. So maybe, for instance, I want to take my sales amount and subtract my total cost here to come up with a profit. I can do that by selecting an empty cell down here, hit the equal key, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on the sum sale amount measure there and subtract the total cost, the sum of the total cost, and click enter. And now I have a new measure here that is the sales amount minus the total cost. And if I want to rename this, I can just change measure 1. We can call this our profit. All right, so we've got our profit measure there. And I could even, and you can see that the number here, we got a little preview here of the number. It's not exactly formatted nice and neat, so we can change the formatting here to be as a currency. Okay, that looks good. And now I can even create like a calculation for a profit margin. So I'm just going to click the equal sign here. And I'm going to use an actual divide function here, which the divide accounts for any division by 0 error. So that's why I'm going to use the function rather than just specifying the numerator and then a slash and then the denominator. So the numerator is going to be my profit, comma, and the denominator is going to be my sales amount. And close parenthesis, I'm going to click enter. And so now we have a profit margin calculation. And I need to format this as a %. That looks good. And let's rename this. We'll call this profit margin. Okay, so that's one of the really important reasons why you may want to create a explicit measure, because it allows you to stack the calculations. You can use calculations and other calculations, and you have control over the logic. Also, you're going to need explicit measures if you want to create a KPI. We don't have time to go into that now, but basically you can think of a KPI as a red light, green light, yellow light type indicator measuring the success of our business. You can't do this with implicit measures, but you can with the explicit measures. So if you want to create these graphical KPI indicators, you'll need to use explicit measures for that. Okay, so we've added some measures in here. I'm going to go back to my Excel workbook. Let's get rid of our product hierarchy. I'm going to drop the calendar hierarchy down here on the rows. And now if I open up my sales table, you'll notice here that these new measures I created are now visible. And I know that they're calculated measures because they have that little FX icon indicating that this is an expression. Okay, so I can get rid of this, and I can add my profit number in here. I can add my profit margin in here, and I can quickly and easily see what are my profit margins and profits for all of these months. And if I want to do something really cool, like bring in maybe channel, I can add in my channel name up on the rows, or on the columns rather. So you've got a lot of flexibility there. One of the other really nice things that you can do with Excel is you can create what are called slicers, and you may be familiar with slicers, but you can think of slicers as a kind of a graphical type filter for your Excel pivot tables or pivot charts. So if I go to Insert, I can find Slicer up here at the top. I can select the attribute I want to include in the slicer, and so I'll put channel name here. Okay, so let me insert a column over here to give me a little bit of space. I can put my slicer over here on the right. And if I click this, you'll see here that I get interactive filtering here. This is also a really nice thing to do if you ever plan on using your pivot charts and pivot tables on a mobile device that may have a touch screen, because I do have a touch screen on my laptop, and I can just select the slicers very easily with my finger, and it's a little easier to use than having to trying to use your filtering here on the pivot table itself. So keep that in mind as well. All right, so I've got that here. I'm going to insert another row up here at the top. I'm going to wrap this up quickly. I'm going to move my calendar hierarchies out of here. And what I'd really like to do is put my product hierarchy here on the rows. And I want to insert a timeline slicer. And a timeline slicer is basically a graphical way for us to sort our data, or our date data. So I can go to my data model up here, specify my connection here to the data model. Click open here. And I'm going to select the date column from my date table. There it is. You notice here it's only displaying those columns that are a data type, and I'm going to click OK. And now I've got this really nifty interactive, come on, move up here, guy. There we go. Timeline here that makes this it's nice and easy to filter through different time ranges. So if I want to look at just March of 2009, I can find March of 2009 and I can click on that, and you can see that my data will filter here. Let's see. Oh, one thing I forgot to do that you'll probably need to do is right-click on this and select Report Connections, and make sure you specify that connection to the pivot table or any pivot chart that you might have in your report. All right, now we've got a live connection to it. So now we can see that it's filtering. Plus, you can also easily select a range. This is also nice if you ever plan on using this from a mobile device. So I can quickly and easily select different years, different months, and filter it dynamically. You also have the ability here in Excel to obviously filter this. You may be familiar with this. So if I want to change the way my timeline looks, I've got some formatting options here. Same thing with my slicer over here. I also have some formatting options here, so you can go to options at the top, select how you want this to look. Let's maybe change the way our pivot table looks. Now everything's nice and orange. There we go. And I like for this to look as much like a dashboard as possible. So I'll come in here and turn off the grid lines in the view. Okay. You can see here with not a lot of work, we were able to create a Power Pivot model pretty quickly, add some hierarchies, add some calculated measures, create a nice little pivot table here for us, add an interactive slicer, add a timeline slicer here, and get some nice functionality out of Power Pivot here in just a little bit. There's a lot more that we could do to really take this Power Pivot model to the next level. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to do that. Maybe we can do another session at some time in order to do that. If you're looking for more resources on Power Pivot, you can always check out my blog, SQLDusty.com. I blog on all kinds of Microsoft BI related stuff, or you can follow me on Twitter at SQLDusty.com. So thank you for Thomas. Thank you for having me and letting me present here. And now we'll open it up to questions.
All right, thanks a lot, Dustin. I really like that timeline, and the computation of the profit margin was a little different than I've done in Tabular. So it's nice to see you do that. A couple of things I didn't know about. Some of the questions. One is, if you've created an Excel 2013 Power Pivot, is it backwards compatible when you load it into 2010 Excel?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. That'd be something I'd have to look up. But I want to say that there are some calculations, there are probably some DAX in there that may not be backwards compatible. So you may run into some errors there, but I don't know the answer to that 100% off the top of my head, so I'd have to look that up.
Okay, you're getting a bunch of great thanks also. I have a Excel
Okay, great.
2012
Well, thank you, everybody.
Power Pivot, but it doesn't. This person has Excel 2012, but the COM add-in doesn't show up for Power Pivot. What does he need to do?
I'm assuming he means 2010 or 2013. Now, if you're on Excel 2010, you'll actually need to download the Power Pivot plugin to get access to that, which you can do a quick Google search for it. It's on MSDN, and what I'll do is after this session is over later this week, I'll post the kind of links and stuff that we discussed here on my blog. So go check my blog out. I'll post the links on there for the Excel Excel 2010 download for Power Pivot.
He's talking
But for
about
Excel
2013.
2013, it should be there. It should be included in Excel 2013. So if you go back to Excel, I'll just show it one more time. Go to Options, Add-ins, go to COM Add-ins, and click Go. And you should You should see this option here, Power View for, or not Power View, Power Pivot for Excel, because Power Pivot was included with Excel 2013.
Do you think there might be a difference between a 32-bit and a 64-bit?
I don't know that off the top of my head either, but
Okay,
to my
well,
knowledge, it should be included as part of Excel.
all right, we'll move on. If I've forgotten to add a column from my table when I create the model originally, how do I add it after the tables are imported?
Okay, that's a good question. So you can go to existing connections, and we can see our existing connection there, and I can select it and click edit. And let me see here. Remember where this is at. Actually, let me do this real quick. I think it's over here. So like if sales, we made some changes there. I'm trying to remember where that is at. Is it table properties? Yeah, there you go, table properties. So if you wanted to come back in here and maybe I decided I need my sales key in there, so I can click the little checkbox there and then change the model and do that.
I think you can also go to the switch to and switch to the query, and if you didn't put it in the original query, you can go back and add it. In the upper right, the switch to, yeah.
Right,
So
yeah.
if you
So if
don't,
you if you've handwritten a query, you can come do that here as well.
if I forgot that column. All right, so can you have many to one relations between tables? Say, relate a date from sales table to date and relate the date to the promotion table. So maybe use the same date dimension to relate to two different fact tables.
Yeah, you can definitely do that. Yeah, so in this case here, I have the date table is only related to sales, but if I had another fact table here, I could also create a many-to-one relationship between the date dimension and that other fact table. Now, one of the restrictions with the current version of Power Pivot and SSAS Tabular, for that matter, is that you can't create many-to-many relationships. So you'll have to write some clever DAX to kind of work around that, but you can't build that into the model. But if you can definitely create multiple many-to-one relationships between a table and other tables. Okay, are there any other questions, Thomas?
I'm sorry, I had myself on mute. I think the guy that asked the question earlier, um, he's posted the 2010 Excel Power Pivot to SharePoint, and then the KPIs and hierarchies aren't showing up, and he wants to know what the compatibility level is in there. That was the question earlier. That might be a little more detailed than what we could provide. I think he might need some help with Microsoft from that. But the next one
Yeah,
is, can the pivot table connect to SSAS? And that'll be our last question.
yeah, definitely. You can definitely create a connection to SSAS. So if you are working in Excel, I'm assuming it means like a pivot table in Excel, you could create a data connection to SSAS. So I could, just come in here and get external data, select from other sources, select analysis services, and then wire that up. Specify my server name, and just keep in mind that SSAS uses Windows authentication, so you need to be able to have read access to that SSAS queue.
All right, so
Good questions, guys.
yeah, that's a lot, and there's a couple more, but we're gonna have to cut it off for now because we're over our time. Thank you for coming. Thank you for presenting, Dustin. We'll definitely hit you up on maybe the next level session, intermediate or advanced, on pivot table. There's a lot of questions about missing part of the session. The recording will be loaded up to our YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search for Pass Excel BIVC, it should be in there no later than a week from today. Usually we get it up there a day or two afterwards, but give us some time to post it. And all of our recordings are loaded to the YouTube channel, so you can go watch these. Sometimes they don't link well in the virtual chapter part of the Pass website. So you can just go to the YouTube channel and search there. Thank you all for attending. Probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks, there'll be another session from Excel BI Virtual Chapter, and we look forward to hearing and seeing y'all again.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Thomas.
thanks, Dustin.